Greetings everyone, I'm Mar. Once again, this is my opinion. As you can tell from the title up there, I am reviewing the latest entry in the DC film library, The Batman. It, of course, is another reboot of the title character, and it stars everyone's favorite Twilight punching bag turned dramatic thespian Robert Pattinson, if I'm pronouncing that right, as the title character, but also stars other people such as Colin Farrell, Zoë Kravitz, Andy Serkis, Jeffrey Wright, Paul Dano, and is directed, of course, by Matt Reeves of Dawn and War for the Planet of the Apes fame, with a screenplay by him and Peter Craig. Before I get too far into this video, just a reminder, if you want to support the channel, both the PayPal and Patreon links are down below. The PayPal link is if you want to just do a one-off support or one-off request. And the Patreon is if you want to continue to support this channel repeatedly. You'll gain access to videos early, and you will also get to submit requests for content for the channel. Like you want a movie you want to get reviewed, you want a specific film to have a commentary. Heck, you can even request a random topic like whatever happened to blue-collar workers in cinema, or favorite films of the 80s, stuff like that. Now that that's out of the way, let's get into the review proper. Now, I've been sitting on this review for a couple weeks, been mulling it over in my head, watching my friends watch it, see their reaction, people at work, and of course trying to figure out exactly how to do this. Now, from what I've seen, this is a film that most people like, but some people do hate it. Like, one of my coworkers didn't like it because the length and some of the other things, like why does Robert look like an emo in there, which I'm like, okay, kind of hard not to see where she's saying with that, but at the same time, it's like, so it's going to be around his eyes. Some people are, the length I can see because it's almost a 3-hour long movie, so I can see that getting to people. But other aspects of the film I really do like, so it's one of those things like you're going to have to really explain what you don't like about that for me to kind of get it. As you can tell, I do really enjoy this film. And like one of my buddies, I'm going to have to say, I think this film is better than Nolan's trilogy. Now, for those of you who don't remember, my thoughts on Nolan's trilogy, here it goes. While I don't hate it, I fall into the category of people who think that Dark Knight Rises is okay, has some good moments, good ideas, but definitely a step down when you look at it as a trilogy. Batman Begins, it was a film that never grabbed me at first, but I have warmed up to it the last couple times I've watched it. I haven't watched it in a couple years, so I don't know how I feel about it now, but I do remember liking it better last time I saw it than the previous 2 times. And Dark Knight I still really do enjoy, although I did watch it again after this one, and I don't know if it was a connection with how I was watching it, but some aspects of it are starting to show their age a little bit. The story and stuff as a whole I still do enjoy. It's just some of the technical aspects are starting to age. And of course, Bale's Batman voice. This city just owes you. Still a big thing, but I'll get to that when I get to it. So I definitely put this in the category of this is one of the best Batman films since '89 and Returns. And in one aspect it does get one thing better than that, and a little bit better than how Nolan was trying to do it. And that's the whole aspect of Batman being a symbol of hope, in addition to being a symbol of fear. Now, as I mentioned earlier, it is directed by Matt Reeves, who in addition to the 2 Apes films he did, he also directed Cloverfield and Let Me In, 2 films I still need to watch. Kind of funny because one of my friends once commissioned me to do a tribute of Cloverfield, which I don't have it anymore, so don't ask. He does a pretty good job directing-wise, gets great performances out of the actors, he sets up the shots pretty well, and despite the length, I think he paces the film pretty well. Now, from what I hear, there was another cut of the film, which is where that deleted scene that's going around it. Don't ask, I haven't watched it all the way through, although I've seen the picture of who's supposed to be this universe's version of the Joker from it. Which, looking at it, I'm like, ooh. Batman pushed him out of the ugly tree and he hit every single branch on the way down. Ooh. Now, great performances and all that. The screenplay, Reeves did have a hand in writing it, so he's definitely connected to the source material here, which is, I think, why he's able to line everything up pretty well. And he wrote it with Peter Craig, who also wrote The Town, Bad Boys for Life, both parts of Hunger Games Mockingjay. And apparently he also wrote the Top Gun sequel and a couple other stuff. And together they do write a pretty good screenplay. And I know that some people are going to have issues with how it's paced, some other little aspects of it, which one of them I'll get into once I start discussing the plot, but they do a pretty good one. The score, and forgive me in advance if I butcher this pronunciation, by Michael Giacchino, is excellent. I can see why he's an Oscar winner from this. This is some of the films he scored: The Incredibles, Jurassic World, Zootopia, Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, Star Trek Into Darkness and Beyond, Coco, Jojo Rabbit, and the film he won an Oscar for, Up. So he has a wide variety of ones, and he scores it perfectly. It has some comic book feel at points. When Batman is scary, it definitely feels kind of like a horror score, which I really do like that vibe of it. Because when you are going from the point that the villains are supposed to be scared of Batman, more so the street thugs, and at one point Penguin, but I'll talk about that later, you really need to feel that, and having a little bit of a horror-esque score definitely helps. Cinematography by Greg Fraser, excellent. He also did the cinematography for Rogue One, the first part of the Dunes films, and a couple episodes of Season 1 of Mandalorian, so he definitely knows his stuff in here. He does a pretty good job working with Reeves to set up his shots. The color grading, the use of yellows and oranges, I do love it. Kind of, compared to another Batman film, it's kind of like how in Batman Returns, how we have the use of like the blues and the like darker colors to go with Christmas and make it like a noir-esque Christmas. Here, since it's Halloween, using the orange and the yellows, especially when it's later at night, and some of the chase scenes definitely add to the little Halloween-y vibe, because the film opens on Halloween. So we have a Batman movie that's a Christmas movie, now a Batman movie that's a Halloween movie. And of course, Fraser's cinematography adds to that. And just the way that him and Reeves work to set up the shots definitely make Batman feel scary. Especially there's one shot at the end of the car chase scene where Penguin's stuck in his car upside down, and Batman's just walking up to him. You could tell from how the shots from Penguin's point of view, it's like, oh yeah, the Batman with that looks scary. I'm getting some Mr. X from Resident Evil 2 remake vibes with him. Bat's gonna give it to you. That's all I gotta say about that. As I said, the movie opens on Halloween. And with the point of view shot, it does fake us out at first, because with how it's going, it's like, okay, decent sized building, looks like it could be a mansion or a high rise apartment building that you have to have some money to have. Penthouse. Alright, important businessman, wife, kid, like we're on Halloween, like, no. Are they about to fake us out and actually show the death of the Waynes again? Because this would be the fourth live action time in less than 40 years we would have seen it. Batman 89, it was an important plot point near the end of the movie. Nolan's important near the beginning. At least with the DCEU, even though it showed it, it just used it for the opening credits one, so it didn't spend too much time on it. And of course the casting would have led to some interesting stuff depending on what they did, but that's another side thing. So I was thinking, like, are they really going to do this? I thought I heard that they weren't going to. But it turns out it was a fake out, and instead of the Waynes, this is actually the Riddler's first victim. And the way this scene is shot and edited together, it does feel like it's out of a horror film. Which I do love the horror vibes that Reeves works into this film. Definitely fits given the Halloween and post-Halloween setting. And considering that the villain is wearing a mask along with the hero, it definitely fits. And if you're going to base this version of the Riddler on the Zodiac Killer, it also fits there. And of course he gets bludgeoned, so it definitely feels like something out of a horror film there. He gets killed, the police show up. Gordon invites Batman to help with the investigation. Now this is early in Batman's career, it's like his second year. So the cops know about him, the lower level criminals know about him, and when they see the bat signal they're afraid. Which I do like how they do get that across with the thug who just robbed the store. He's looking in the shadows like his Batman in there. He freaks himself out so much he gets hit by a taxi at a stop sign. I can't help but chuckle at that. That's a good amount of humor there. And of course ties into the aspect I mentioned about Batman having that Mr. X-y vibe. Which of course first time we see him actually appear in costume, it goes with that. That's that scene where he's like, I'm vengeance. Beats the crap out of the thugs. And this is where the film also has a little bit of its noir vibe, down to Batman in his narration. Now, most of the low-level cops, like he's a vigilante, even though they're willing to work with him because of Gordon. It's mainly the upper-level cops, the ones that you look at, yeah, they're probably corrupt, like the commissioner and later the police chief. They don't want anything to do with the Batman being there. Like the commissioner, the moment he sees Batman's in there, he's like, I want him out of here. Of course, that also seems to be more from the fact that the press are downstairs, and it's like, if there's any word of the Batman up here working with us, it's going to be bad. Of course, Batman does help. He does help Gordon with all the clues. He does help solve the riddles. And with how the plot's written, and the twist we find out later involving this version of the Riddler, who still has Edward as his first name, but just his last name is Enigma. It's another N-word. Nashton, if I remember right. They definitely are reflections of one another, down to the fact that they're both orphans, which I know that's a little early to bring that up, but I have to bring that up if I'm talking about them being reflections of one another. I should continue to talk about that once I get to the Riddler and his motivation. Now, the plot progresses forward. Batman does continue to help the police with each victim, each set of clues, each riddles. He messes up here or there, like the one victim at the funeral, he isn't able to help them, but that's partially due to the guy's own stubbornness. This is where Batman starts to get chased by the police for a little bit, and I just love how that scene's shot, edited, with Batman having to use the cable to go up with all the police in the building running after him. Of course, part of that is because of Gordon and his little plan, but also part of it is from a BS thing where the police chief is like, I could just arrest you now for assaulting an officer. It's like, the officer touched him first. He entered his personal space. Granted, he's a vigilante and he's masked, but it's like, you just touched his face without permission or consent. Of course anyone's going to get like that and get him to get your hands off him. That's one of those little weird things. It kind of goes into the level of like when you're talking to police at a door. You tell them you don't want them in, but yet they stick their foot in the door, and if you try to close the door, like, assaulting an officer! It's like, no. You stuck your foot in there. Get your foot out. You were not invited in, so get your foot away from the door. You have no legal cause to do it. At least with the mask, there's a little bit more legal cause, since being a vigilante technically is illegal. But it's still one of those things like, you guys know that's very, very thin, and you know it. Now, from there, we see a little bit more Batman and him being a little bit of a rookie. Now, part of it is he goes overboard, like we see in the I Am Vengeance scene, beating the crap out of the guy. See a little bit of that later. With him gliding, he's still pretty much a rookie. Him trying to interrogate the thugs, and of course him trying to break into Falcone's. They just call him Falcone here, so I don't know if from proper Italian the E's not supposed to be there. But I know Nolan's, they did that. But then again, Nolan's film's also pronounced Ra's al Ghul as Ra's al Ghul, so it could be that. But I'm just going to go with how they pronounce it in the film, and that's Falcone. Who in this film is played by John Turturro perfectly, which I like how they portray him in Batman Begins. You definitely feel like he's a gangster, but he's not really scary. Here, with how Turturro plays him, Falcone is a little scary and he's creepy, which kind of ties into his whole relationship with Selina Kyle, which I'm not going to spoil that, but I'm like, yeah, that's a plot point I didn't see coming. I don't know if that's actually accurate to certain incarnations of the comics, but for this alternating universe, I'll allow it, and with how they work it into the plot, it's interesting. Especially if the Catwoman-Batman relationship actually goes and bears fruit in this continuity. It's going to make for some very interesting stuff. Batman, he learns throughout the course of the film. By the end, once he's beaten Riddler, and even though he doesn't fully stop his plan, it becomes that symbol of hope near the end. You can see he's going to go into the Batman, or this universe's version of the Batman we think of, where he works with the cops, he brings in the criminals. I mean, he's still working outside the law, that he's going to have his critics, but for the most part, the cops that even don't like him just tolerate him as long as he's bringing results in. And they might still wonder who's underneath the mask, but, you know, they'll tolerate it until the time comes where it's like, yeah, we gotta bring him in. Think like Mask of the Phantasm, like that. I could see that happening in it. It's just him becoming a good symbol of hope. Just the scene of him helping the mayor out. that right there, and then helping the people on top of the roof at the very end. That if there's any shot that sums up the type of symbol of hope he becomes in this film, it's that. And of course, with him making mistakes early on, it's just like in Arkham Origins. He's not refined like he is in the later games, so he's going to be a little bit more brutish, a little bit more angry, and letting his emotions get the better of him. And he learns. I mean, he's still smart like you would expect from Batman. I mean, he solves the riddles and all that. But it's not like he's thinking 2 steps ahead or trying to think 2 steps ahead to figure out what his villain's plans are, which definitely shows in the third act of this one. But other versions of that happens too, like Dark Knight, for example. He doesn't think of what Joker's second plan could be. Same thing here, because I'm going to say this, Riddler does have a second plan. I'm not going to spoil what it was, but I'm going to say this about it. That part of the film, I did not see coming the first time I watched it. Part of the reveal while I was watching it, I'm like, the main thing is on this side of the screen, whereas a little subtle hint about it is on that side of the screen, and I noticed that, and I'm like, okay, what's going on with this? What is that type of gun, or where they sell that, have anything to do with it? And then once they revealed it, I'm like, oh. And then, of course, the second time I was watching the film, which, if I haven't mentioned it yet, I did watch this film twice in theaters, in back-to-back weekends. The first time, of course, it played better because it's the first time you see the film. You're trying to watch it for everything. Whereas the second time, I'm still enjoying everything. I started to feel the length a bit more, but I still enjoyed it, and I was looking more for the foreshadowing and all the clues. And watching them that time, it's like, oh, that's very interesting to see how well they foreshadow a lot of that stuff. And if you do enjoy the film, I highly recommend watching it again, just to look for that. It's very sweet. Just shows that Reeves and all them planned it. But then again, Reeves also being one of the screenwriters, he can plan how to foreshadow that when you take it from page to screen. Now, Pattinson, as Batman, he plays it pretty well. Now, his character is definitely one that lingers more on the Batman side of the character rather than the Bruce Wayne. Now, I know some people, like one of my friends, complain about the Burton version of it where he doesn't really have much of a Bruce Wayne persona, which I get it. It's not like the comics where definitely more a playboy or all that, or like some of the earlier comics that were more Zorro inspired, and of course the Nolan one where it's the fop, which I've said it before and I'll say it again, I'm not a big fan of that cover thing, because that's one of those things when you find out that he was Batman, you're like, that explains a lot. I mean, same thing with Burton's one, but at least of that, you could play off the fact he's just more reclusive, eccentric. You know, just prefers to be broody and keep to himself. And of course, you know what happens to his parents. You're like, okay, he just doesn't want to be out in the spotlight. He'll just be a philanthropist and all that. Of course, you're still going to be like, oh, that explains a lot when you find out he is the Batman, but it's not like he's actively trying to draw your attention away. He's trying to be a little bit more down low. And of course, that's just my preference about it. If you feel the opposite, that's all right. Now, but with here, he doesn't really have that much of a separate presence. I mean, there's only like one scene in the movie where he actually is in front of other people as Bruce Wayne. And that's the funeral scene. And there he's just brooding. And of course, Pattinson, the look behind his eyes and all that, you really do see the pain. He's trying to act normal, but it's hard for him to act normal when he's not used to acting normal. He hasn't been able to act normal in front of other people since the murders. But he does empathize. Like, as Bruce Wayne or as Batman, he empathizes with the kid relatives of the murder victims. Like the first victim, which is who the funeral's for. When he's there, you can definitely tell he sees a lot of himself in that kid. And in fact, when that party is crashed, he actually jumps to go save the kid. Which I know some people are going to go, oh, that might be him trying to out himself as Batman. But it's like, even without people knowing Bruce Wayne is Batman, him going to save the kid from it, more people would recognize, like, well, okay, why I can see why Bruce Wayne did that. Because one, it's a spur of the moment, but plus he also does see a kindred spirit in the kid, because they both just lost a parent to a senseless act of violence. The only major difference is the trauma related to it. Whereas Bruce actually saw the murders happen in front of him, with the kid, he found the body in the aftermath. Two different levels of trauma, still messed up, and are going to really affect you up here. And of course, as Batman, he carries himself well. The scenes where Batman's supposed to be scary, he definitely does feel it. I do like with the costume design, it does go with the rookie Batman aesthetic. Even down to not having a lot of batarangs. The only thing he has really is that thing on his chest that he removes and can cut stuff with. And of course, the boots they use and him intentionally putting the weight down. That's where, like I mentioned before, the whole Mr. X type of comparison when he's trying to feel like he's scary definitely works. In his Batman voice, it definitely feels a bit more natural than Bale's, less forced. And I know there was a whole joke about him not bulking up. He's a lean built in this film. Imagine like if Michael Keaton actually had gotten in like a decent shape. And I mean, he doesn't look bad, but like toned shape while prepping for that film. That's the type of build that Robert has in this film. He's not like overly large, but then again, watching Dark Knight, neither was Bale's Batman. It wasn't until we get to Affleck's Batman where we get one that's really kind of big. But it works for this film, especially since he's supposed to be quick while having strength behind his blows. And they definitely fit it. Which, to tie back into one thing I was talking about with how the film is shot and to compare it to Nolan's film again, one aspect of the character I think they came across better here was him moving in the shadows to attack the bad guys. Because that's one aspect that begins that still has not aged well. That first scene where Batman's attacking Falcone's men. Where it's like, okay, I get that you're supposed to show that it's disorientating for the bad guys, but don't do that at the expense of the audience being able to watch what's going on. When I'm watching an action scene like that, I want to actually be able to watch what's happening, not be like, what the... I don't want to... Unless it's first person, I don't want to be in the shoes of the bad guys. I want to just be watching Batman kick their butts. And here, I think they got that across better with the fact that it's a single shot. The only lighting you're seeing in the hallway is when the guys are trying to shoot. So every time the lighting goes up, you see Batman moving in a different spot, going after a different thug. Gets the point across better than constantly going, oh, where is he? Where is he? Where is he? Bop, bop. Okay, Paul Dano as the Riddler, he does a pretty good job. You definitely feel that he is a killer. He's in that Zodiac mold. Now, the way he enunciates his lines, you definitely could tell he does have social awkwardness with him, even when he's trying to be scary, like the scene in the during the funeral where he's talking with both his next victim and with Batman. You definitely could feel the awkwardness there, but it's intentional. It works for a character like the Riddler, where he's trying to be the smartest person in the room, a foil for the Batman, but there's still that there. And of course, when he's caught and unmasked, which I love the scene with how he's unmasked. I just love how they set that up, going in with all of the riddles and Batman only realizing when it's too late, and then him justifying it all, and just his comparisons to Bruce, how they're both orphans, but for someone like Bruce, you don't really understand what that word means because you're up in your mansion, you got a butler, all that. You were freezing cold, you didn't have to wake up to rats gnawing on you or worrying because one of the babies died because of the cold. That's going off of some of his dialogue there, which I get it. I mean, yeah, he had a tough upbringing, but with that, he also ignores the fact that Batman is psychologically scarred due to what he witnessed. I mean, even if he has a butler and all the money, that doesn't take away the fact he still technically is an orphan because his parents were just murdered. He still has those psychological scars, which of course steal a line from Knox. What do you think seeing this does to a person? It makes him dress up like a bat. And of course, his reaction when his plan doesn't work, perfect, and just that little scene at the end. Continuing on into the future films, which I can't wait for the sequel to this film to come out. Now, one thing that they did add to this film that you don't really see many other versions of the Riddler get, except of course maybe the Jim Carrey one, is that the Riddler by the end knows who Batman is, which I love that because it's like, ooh, where's he going to go with this? Now he doesn't say anything at the end, so I think it's one of those things that he'll keep that knowledge to himself unless it becomes pertinent. I mean, There's only a couple villains that would probably use that information to their advantage. Like we see what happens in the comics when Bane figured it out. And even in Arkham Origins, what he would do. Joker, only a few that found out used it to their advantage, such as Batman Beyond Joker. Of course, that one was also to mess with him up here. A lot of the other Jokers don't seem to care who he is, but with Riddler, I think he would just mainly use it to try to prove his superiority to Bruce. And of course, to show he's a superior orphan turned masked vigilante / murderer. And of course, Dano is all great to see him. I haven't seen Looper, so I don't know how he is in that. Don't really remember him in Cowboys and Aliens, but I haven't seen that film since it came out, so. I remember him in Prisoners, and he does a pretty good job with his role there, and that was one of my favorite films of that year. And he does bring a little bit of that type of vibe to this character, but not 100% the same, since the characters are not quite the same, but a little bit of that there. And then, of course, the mask he wears is not super intimidating, but it fits how the Riddler is redesigned in that Zodiac mold. And the riddles that he gives, pretty good, definitely fit the whole crime aesthetic. And it's one of those ones that keeps you guessing. Like, I was trying to figure out where they're going to go, because knowing the Riddler's like, not all is what it seems, and then when you see each one, you're like, okay, there it goes. Zoë Kravitz, she does a pretty good job as Selina Kyle. Definitely had more to work with than Anne Hathaway, even though I like Anne, but she's kind of wasted in that one. Definitely believe her budding romance with Batman as the film goes along. Now, one line she says is one of those things that the anti-woke crowd are probably going to go up in arms with, and that's her whole line about the white man and their whole privilege thing, which, yeah, it definitely is a little in that vibe, but you got to consider where Selina is in this film and what her past is. She's seen how corrupt Gotham is and how most of the people in power who sit up there are people who are of European backgrounds. Some of them old money, some of them new money. And they are privileged. So there is truth in what she's saying. And that's the only type of thing that goes in that direction in the whole film. Like, I know some people have tried to lambast the film, especially a group that, when you shorten their name, it is basically me. Because I'm glad I left that group a long time ago. Try to basically shit on the whole film because of that, which is like, that's not really enough to crap on a whole film. Now, if it was brought up over and over again to the point where it was bumped over your heads with that, or was used as a justification to make an unfunny comedy, then yeah, I could see it. But just one line, especially when it fits with the character, I don't see it. And of course, she leaves for Bloodhaven at the end of the movie, so there's that. So, trying to improve her life. Hopefully she comes back in a sequel, though, because I would like to see her romance with Batman continue. Kravitz does an excellent job, like I said. Not her first comic book movie. I mean, she was in X-Men First Class, and she also previously voiced Catwoman in the Lego Batman movie, so she's familiar with the character there. And she does have a pretty good chemistry with Robert, so I just wonder how she'd play it when she found out who Batman actually is. Andy Serkis as Alfred. He does a pretty good job here. Now, you can all see why he's in here, because, I mean, Matt Reeves, the 2 previous 8 films. Of course, Serkis is in here. You definitely believe him as Batman's mentor and his surrogate father figure, or uncle figure, I guess you could say. But compared to some of the previous Alfreds, it feels like Serkis is wasted in the role, because there's not much for him to do. It's like, not like he has a big moment. The biggest dramatic moment he has is when his character's in the hospital and he's trying to convince Batman that not all is what it seems when it comes to his parents' backstory. Which, I think this is probably the point in the review where I mentioned, is that they do twist the backstory involving Batman's parents a little bit. Now, I know in the 89 film they wanted to change the reason for the murder a bit originally, and that was involving Bruce's dad being involved in politics and having Rupert Thorne wanting to get a potential rival out of the way. Well, they do bring this up into the film here, where Thomas was running for mayor when he was assassinated. I guess you could say that, because of what we hear later, that it was an assassination, and not just an outright murder. But it's one of those things that we hear a couple different versions of how it went down. And considering how corrupt the town is, you could believe the last one we hear. But since we never find out who actually pulled the trigger, who knows? It could have been that last one was going to happen, and then they went the wrong way and they ran into Joe Chill, and it was just a random act of violence. Maybe the sequel will actually clarify that. I mean, even in that scene in the hospital, Alfred even says he's spent ages trying to figure it out. But going off of that, Thomas Wayne was running for mayor, and some dirty laundry about his wife came up. And I don't know if this is actually how it is in the comics, but if it's not in the comics, I do like the fact that they make Martha an Arkham. That's a nice little big money thing there, showing, she's ties to old money that is been up there in the Gotham history for ages, and so is Thomas, so those two going together. Her family having a lot of secrets, and of course some of them being issues, which of course again ties into Bruce. He shows that there's a little bit of genetic predisposition there, but showing that he's rising above it, because it's not always one's going to take over the other. Because you all know my whole thing about the nature versus nurture argument. I've said it before. I think it's a little bit of both. Sometimes one's going to play a more important role. With him, he has that little bit of nature thing from his maternal side of the family, but then the nurture part, of course, is all the trauma. But of course, as we see, he rises above it. It's not like he becomes essentially like a Batman version of the Joker, to put it bluntly. Him finding it out, that's good material, and Robert does act against that pretty well. It's a nice little thing. I hope we do learn a little bit more about that whole situation in the sequel. But that was a nice little plot development there to throw in there, how he uncovers it. Gives him a reason to talk with Falcone about some of it. And Falcone's interactions with Bruce, those are pretty good. Those are scenes where you wonder, how much of this is Carmine telling the truth and how much of this is BSing us? Which is a little bit of both, as it turns out. And John Turturro, he does an excellent job there. Like I've already said, Turturro plays a scary Carmine, and it goes pretty well. And the last part of his character arc does kind of hint that he knows who Batman is. But of course, he doesn't say anything, which if he does know who it is, it makes you wonder, why doesn't he say anything? Does he not have the oxygen? Colin Farrell as the Penguin, excellent job here. I mean, I love Danny DeVito as the Penguin, but Colin, he's kind of approaching there. We'll just got to see how he plays it as a main villain in a future one. But from what we see here, yeah, I think he's going to do a pretty good job. And of course, the makeup effects for him, excellent. That's definitely how I imagine a Penguin looking in a more realistic sense. Because, with how he is in the Burton ones, definitely fits the vibe of that film, but it's definitely a little bit more theatrical than it is here, where this is a more realistic version of Oswald Cobblepot, or as he called himself in here, Oz. Which, of course, there's plenty of Wizard of Oz jokes you could make there. And now the Bat will beat him up. Of course, Jeffrey Wright, Gordon already said, pretty good job, excellent performance. He has pretty good chemistry with Robert, so you believe them as a crime-fighting pair there. Of course, Wright also played Felix in the Bond films, and he was the voice of the Watcher in What If. And that's all of the actors I have on here, but the rest of the cast do a pretty good job. The guy that plays the commissioner, the guy that plays the police chief, all the actors that play the side characters, definitely makes this Gotham City feel alive with everything around it. And there's not really much else to say about the film, because I didn't put a lot of notes in here. It's going all off the top of my head, but I thought it was well paced, even though it is a little long in the tooth. If you're not really into longer films, it might not grab you, but if you can adjust for its length, you should be able to get into the film. Now, with how the twists and turns go, you have to really be in the right mindset for it. So, if you really need to be in the right mindset for certain films, this is one probably to watch in the middle of the day, not at night. Both times I saw it, I saw the last showing, and I do think that did kind of help a little bit with the vibe of the film. Now, for paying attention to a longer film, just a reminder, ADHD. So if someone with ADHD can pay attention to this film at midnight, you guys should be able to in the middle of the day. But hey, if you don't like longer films, different strokes, different folks, as we all say. Now, the time with the whole hope thing, I'm going to end this review with one line that Batman narrates near the end of the film, and I think that sums up what his character becomes at the end and how he's probably going to be represented in the sequel. And this is a pretty good inspirational quote for overcoming trauma and not letting your demons and the ghosts of your pasts basically control you. As Jake would say, make it to where your history is not your destiny. Our scars can destroy us, even after the physical wounds have healed. But if we survive them, they can transform us. They can give us the power to endure and the strength to fight. Till next time, guys.